Congratulations to the Institute of Commonwealth Studies on 30 years of advancing human rights education. I am proud to be part of this community and grateful for the ways it continues to shape my journey.
Throughout the 30 years, I know that the Institute has strengthened and encouraged us activists and human rights students to courageously speak up on issues of human rights in our own countries as well as globally.
I'm a Zimbabwean writer and journalist. I studied for the MA in Human Rights at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies.
I was a student on the MA in Human Rights in the 2017 to 2018 cohort. And my current job is International Advocacy Officer at Anti-Slavery International.
I currently work as an Administrative Officer at the Ministry of Justice, and I'm training to become a barrister.
I currently work for the United Nations as the UN Country Coordination Officer for the Bahamas.
I am currently the Gender Advisor for the Middle East and North Africa region at Equality Now, which is an international human rights organization.
Currently, I'm working for the Malawi Human Rights Commission. This is an independent national human rights institution that was established under the Constitution of the Republic of Malawi.
I'm currently the Executive Director of South Asians for Human Rights, which is a regional network of human rights defenders based here in South Asia.
For me, human rights education is more than academic. It's a practical tool for shaping the just, inclusive, and resilient societies that we want.
The grounding that I received at the Institute shapes the way I approach gender justice work. It has given me confidence to engage with both international institutions and local activists, bridging the gap between lived experiences and legal advocacy.
And in my journalism, I try to practice human rights-based reporting, where inclusivity and rights are built in from the start.
The program inspired me to keep learning, so I went on to study for a Master's in Law and the Bar Training course.
You get to learn directly from academics who are not only doing really exciting, innovative bits of research, but are also genuinely approachable and supportive and inspiring teachers.
So thank you, and congratulations to the Institute on 30 years of advancing human rights through education.
Well, good evening again, everyone. It's so lovely to see you all here, alumni, current students, colleagues, and friends. It's really a special occasion, and I'm sure, like me, you found that video quite moving, all of the work that's been done around the world on human rights, and we've all come together tonight as a community. So I want to say at the very beginning, although we're all sitting here in rows, I want there to be some informality to tonight's event. This is an opportunity for many of us to get to meet each other, get to learn about each other's work and to make some new friends. And just thank you for joining us tonight to mark this milestone, the 30th anniversary since the launch of our MA in Understanding and Securing Human Rights in 1995, which is incredible. It's 3 decades of teaching, learning, helping support the capacity of human rights defenders in the Commonwealth and around the world. And I want to start, before we get into tonight's event, by thanking some people warmly, particularly the team that delivers this master's program, Corinne, Jane, Damien, Bronwyn, Karen, who are all here tonight, and to thank the wider Institute of Commonwealth Studies family who made this program such a wonderful place to learn. And it's also terrific to have some of our former teachers with us this evening, David Cantor, Sarah Singer, Julian Berger, Shabnan Monopor, Adriana Giunta, and John Duncan. Thank you for being part of the story of this Masters and for continuing to be part of our community. We also have some warm greetings from long-serving colleagues who couldn't be here tonight. Nazlia Ghana, Paul Greedy, John Cerrone among them, who send their best wishes. And it's good to see some of our former directors of the Institute here tonight as well, including Professor Philip Murphy. I think it's important on nights like this just to take a moment before we rush ahead to reflect on how this all began, how this master's program started. In 1995, under the distinguished leadership of James Maynard, and in collaboration with colleagues, interestingly, at Amnesty International, it's when this idea for this master's was developed, the idea that actually we need to have a practice-focused master's. And let's draw upon our friends here in London who work in different NGOs who might be willing to come along and share their insights and their knowledge. So really an incredible origin story. And there was a really clear gap back then that still exists today in practice-focused training for human rights defenders. And together they built a program that bridged that gap. And the master's program was and remains really interdisciplinary and innovative. At a time when human rights education was often theoretical, and I think still often is, and largely confined to legal studies, this program insisted that human rights are about people, and that rights are things that are lived, not just things that you find in legislation or in treaties. And 30 years on, that original vision still defines what we do. The Institute has always tried to be forward-looking, and we're a place that works hard to connect knowledge with action and a bridge between academia and practice, and also a bridge across national boundaries. Nearly all of our projects, I'm very proud to say, aim to support human rights defenders around the world. And for example, under the leadership of one of my colleagues here tonight, Olivia Loabakuna, I'm delighted to announce that we've also just secured some further funding for another 3 years of work on combating discriminatory laws around the world by working to support a cluster of fellows from 5 or 6 different countries globally. And initiatives like that are only possible because of the credibility of this institute built up over 75 years. Its academics, its fellows, its alumni, all of you, its networks, and the networks that you all here sustain through your work, collaborations, and importantly, your mentorship of new generations. You're the ones, of course, who secure and advance human rights in ways that ripple far beyond London, far beyond this building around the world. As we celebrate tonight, I felt we must be honest about the world in which we live when we're talking about human rights. We are seeing significant strains on multilateralism, rising authoritarianism, assaults on basic freedoms, entrenched inequality, and the devastating effects of climate change, conflict, and displacement. Technology brings enormous promise, but also new threats, surveillance, manipulation, disinformation. And as my friend Claire said, it is in moments like this and times like this that a human rights education is more urgent than ever. It gives people specialized knowledge, critical judgment, new strategies, usually from talking to each other. Some things have worked in some regions, and it's interesting for people in other regions to share those examples and those ideas, to make new friends in solidarity, and the courage to stand up for truth and to hold power to account and to imagine collectively and in solidarity a better future. The master's program, I want to say, is really the jewel in the crown of the Institute. And that is because, for no other reason, that it is led with thoughtfulness and with care. So I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge Corinne Lennox, who's here in the front, for her scholarship and her leadership. She's a wonderful colleague of the distance learning program, and leadership that was recognised just this month with her promotion to Professor of Human Rights and International Relations. Please join me in congratulating Professor Corinne Lennox. Tonight is also very much a celebration of her. The Institute of Commonwealth Studies continues to move with the times, and as you've heard, in 2018 we launched our distance learning program, opening doors to students worldwide. This year we're adding a new module on women's human rights, and we're in fruitful conversations with friends at BICL, the British Institute of International and Comparative Law, about the possibility of a business and human rights module, always developing, always looking for where the needs are around the world. And at the same time, some traditions endure, and rightly so. The Geneva study tour, which some of you have been on, remains very popular. With my friend and colleague Karen, I was very privileged to join this year, and it was just a wonderful week with students. And you know, the enjoyment that comes from making new friends in new countries, and also enjoying experiencing directly some of the human rights institutions that exist around the world and in Geneva. I think one of the things that makes this program so special is the knowledge and experience that students bring into the classroom, that you bring into the classroom. Many of our students are mid-career professionals already working in their communities. They share experience and insight with generosity, and that peer-to-peer exchange keeps our discussions lively and grounded and practical, and our alumni all of you have been very generous in return, coming back as guest practitioners, mentors, collaborators, and our growing network of fellows across the Institute brings fresh energy and expertise to both the Masters and the PhD teaching, and some of you new fellows are here tonight. We've heard with over 900 alumni worldwide. I think we have one of the largest and most active alumni communities in the School of Advanced Study. And we are proud of the many graduates who've continued to doctoral study here and elsewhere, and some who are here tonight, like Nick Maple, Vicky Knox, and the Refugee Law Initiative, have returned to teach. And I think this is a really satisfying symmetry, and students becoming colleagues and colleagues becoming teachers of the next cohort. I'm also pleased to share some news just to finish. To mark the 30th anniversary, the Convocation Trust has generously funded a scholarship for the Master's Program in Human Rights by Distance Learning for entry in February 2026. This scholarship will enable a leading human rights activist to study with us while continuing their work in their region. And applications open tomorrow and close on the 17th of December. And we are really very grateful to the Convocation Trust for this support. This builds on its earlier generosity in 2019 when they also funded a scholarship to help launch the distance learning program. We should also acknowledge the use of Ali Fund and the Commonwealth Scholarship Commission and other donors whose generosity helps students from around the world to join our master's program and enrich this community. So as we celebrate tonight, my thanks goes to everybody who's taught on the program, studied on the program, supported it and believed in it over the last 3 decades. This Masters, I think is fair to say, has always been more than just a degree. It's a community committed to putting human rights into practice in all the many ways that take shape. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to the School of Advanced Study. Thank you to the team at the Institute. And congratulations on 30 years of human rights education. I'd now like to call up our panel to come up to the front. In no particular order, and I'll call your name, and as you come up I'll say just a few sentences. But those of you who want to learn a bit more about our panellists, there's information contained in the brochures, I think a QR code, you can read about them. All of them are very distinguished in their own ways, and we are so fortunate to have them join us here tonight. Firstly, Bridget Burrows. She is the Global Program Director at 350.org. She has a strong background in building grassroots human rights movements on social, economic, and environmental justice. Take a seat wherever you like. Anastasia Denisova, welcome. Stasia is the Human Rights Education Coordinator for Europe and Central Asia at Amnesty International. And she's a human rights educator and advocate with nearly 20 years of experience in designing and leading transformative education initiatives across Eurasia. Please come and join us, Stasia. Thank you. Shahindha Ismail. Shahindha is the founder and director of the Maldivian Democracy Network, MDN. And Shahindha has advocated for hundreds of protesters arbitrarily detained and tortured during the movement for democracy in the Maldives since 2004, I believe. Yeah. Please come and join us, Shahindha. And Gaia Marcus. Gaia is the director of the Ada Lovelace Institute. And prior to joining Ada, was the deputy director of Advanced Analytics and Local Capabilities at the Spatial Data Unit within the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. I hope I got that right. You can correct me. Thank you. It's my privilege to be here to talk to all of you. This is what tonight's all about, to have a bit of a chat about where we're at in 2025s and human rights education. And there's a theme to tonight's panel, which has been carefully chosen, called Educate, Agitate, and Organise, Strategies for Securing Human Rights in Turbulent Times. And that is because we are navigating a turbulent period, and you don't need me to describe to you precisely what I mean by that. But in these moments, we need to ask ourselves questions like, how do we use education, agitation, and organisation to adapt to this environment? And to answer this question, we've brought all of you together, and I hope you get to know each other this evening if you don't know each other already. And just to say that we've organised the panel around those words, educate, agitate, and organise, because it was a rallying call by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was a leader of the Dalit community in India and lead drafter of the Indian Constitution. And his words are a useful way, I think, to frame what's happening in the world and how a human rights education fits within it. So just to then begin by asking you some questions around those words, looking firstly at the word educate. You all have a master's in human rights, from understanding and securing human rights from our program. I'd like to ask you all in order, what first motivated you to seek a formal education in human rights? And how has the degree been useful for the sort of work that you have been doing and are doing now?
Hi, everyone. I'm afraid my answer is probably the least profound. I actually found out about the MA by mistake. As a child, I'd always wanted to be a human rights lawyer. But through essentially puberty, I decided that I couldn't control my emotions enough to necessarily be trusted in a court of law. It's a pity, I think, how long it took me to understand how your cycle works. But I'm not exactly known for my poker face. So maybe being a barrister was never really on the cards for me. But yeah, so fast forward to the end of my degree, I'm graduating in 2009, which was not a great time to graduate. I was actually going to do a master's in in Latin American studies. I'm in the talk about this master's, and they mentioned that there was a course in common with the MA in human rights. I didn't know you could do a MA in human rights, and that's the point they lost me. And then just how grounded and how practice-based and practical the master's was. I'd done a 4-year degree. I couldn't hear the word torture anymore. I didn't want to have just theoretical conversations. I wanted to know how to get stuff done. That's where I'm at.
Thank you. Thanks, Gaia.
Sorry. The program was actually suggested to me by a colleague in the Human Rights Committee. We do a lot of educating, public awareness, and just dealing with a lot of human beings who are often traumatized. So I chose to learn how to do it right. That's the short answer. Thank you.
Anastasia?
Yeah, for me, I was motivated to reflect on the practical experience that I had by that time. So that was my mid-career, as it was said in the beginning, degree, because from 2004, I've been working with forced migrants, refugees, and ethnic minorities in Russia. As a legal advisor, as a social caseworker, and that's been a lot of knowledge, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of mixed emotions, and the need to put it in a bigger picture and understand what skills I need and what theoretical background I need to move it forward. So I looked at the Master in Understanding and Securing Human Rights as the place to reflect, to share lessons learned, to hear feedback on how I've been doing my work. And that exceeded my expectations, the whole program. And the second part was how has the degree been useful for the current work? In many ways. I've been working, I worked before on a local level and regional level, meaning only Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and that part of the region. But after Masters, I saw the bigger picture and joined the International Human Rights Organization, which I think was, the consequences of studies and the broader picture of the world I gained. Thanks.
Bridget?
I did the master's program, I've worked out 23 years ago, and I was a very naive 22-year-old when I first came. And I guess I knew that there was injustice in the world and I didn't know what to do about it. I think how it's been useful for me, has particularly been around, it gave me the language, the articulation of both the injustice and the system and practice to collectively challenge it, that there was a system out there. And I think it's also been useful because it allowed me to understand that there was a huge amount of wisdom of generations of people that have fought for rights, articulated them, evolved them, and I think that that is the challenge for each generation, is to recommit itself to understanding the challenges of today and finding the ways that we can find common ground and cooperation for our shared humanity.
Thank you. And it's interesting to hear that one of the things that you really took away from the program was that it gave you language for how to talk about injustice and discrimination and these issues. And I'm wondering if, you know, you also have some memories of something that stood out from the program that was particularly illuminating or particularly useful that you reflected back on, or you knew at the time was going to be useful for your work in the future. Any of you, I offer the question up.
I went into the Masters, I think, how a lot of people finish. So I went into the Masters really thinking that human rights were not a thing, they were a construct, but they were a useful construct. And I left the Masters very much thinking that human rights aren't a thing, they're a construct, but they're a very useful construct. And I think, to build on your point, the point of history, of shared language, working in kind of a newish sector like AI and data, everyone seems to pretend that the world kind of started 10 years ago. And just reminding people of like the history of the work that we have done to make sure that things are just and grounded gives you a depth that just having that rights focus underpins everything and gives you that sense of purpose. And I think when everything is changing so quickly, you need that kind of thread of human dignity, of, you know, we have been here before, we have won before, we'll continue.
Any other reflections on that? Anything that particularly stood out from your time in the Master's program?
Okay. There were a number of images coming through my mind. One of them was the Geneva trip and the fun of it. But also during one of the visits, I sneaked into the library in Geneva offices, this huge building. And I remember coming across the notes from that General Assembly in 1948 that voted on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I was just lost in that. I was so inspired by how those discussions in those notes, in those years, remind me of what is going on now. The same old talks about what is above sovereignty of human rights. So for me, that trip and that library was memorable. Yeah, maybe others want to share?
Shahindha?
My moment was not very bright. So in my work, most of my work has been on the Maldives and in the South Asian region, and on specific rights. So when we started learning about international law, I don't have a law background, and also the genocide module. It was, I would say, the most illuminating, most that I have learned something new, not only in applying the genocide lens to see what's going on in a place, but also to, when applying those Lemkin's genocide lens, to also learn about the struggles of these communities that we've been neighbors to, for example, but we never knew the pain that people went through. So that was really, I hold it very close to my heart, and I'm very happy that I was able to learn it and to be able to contribute to their advocacy at some level. Yeah.
Thank you. Turning then to the word agitate. There's so much happening in the world at the moment, and those who have, who care about the international human rights legal framework and who care about the elimination of discrimination and so on are horrified at so much that we're seeing in the world, and how quickly some of these things that we've held dear, are unraveling almost at an accelerating rate, even just this year. And so looking at the word agitate and drawing on your own work and your own experience, is there anything that you would suggest should be included in a practice-focused master's on human rights if you were to design one now for the next 10 years? And I ask that because, often experts in this field, they look at everything they're teaching and they say, it's becoming more difficult for me to teach some of these things because of the way things are happening in the world. What do you think should be included in a master's program looking forward to the next 10 years, so that if you're a student coming on board wanting to strengthen your existing work or enter the field as a human rights defender, that would be useful to you? Shahindha, yeah.
I am actually writing my dissertation. I'm just starting on my dissertation this semester. So what I have been working on is the work of human rights defenders who are in exile. So what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of literature on protecting human rights defenders and especially on relocation and other kinds of protection mechanisms. But what happens to people after they are relocated to a safe space? So I think the movement can benefit from learning about how people can actually continue advocacy, continue agitating, beyond beyond surviving. So I think I would really like to see that being explored more in the scholarship.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that? What do you think should be included in a forward-looking master's program which is practice-focused? Gaia?
I mean, I would say this, but so 10 years ago I was asked to do a paper for the 25th anniversary on what turned out to be slightly oddly named kind of human rights in this newish digital paradigm. And no surprises, I still think we should be doing more work on this. So I think understanding the global economy of digital infrastructure that is underpinning AI, really looking at economic factors and the amount of influence that we have in the state at the moment. Really thinking about what it means to live in a world where you basically have 4 big technology companies that are pretty much underpinning digital infrastructure that is privatized for a whole globe. Thinking about dynamics of being in a so-called race between China and the US and what that is doing for states' decisions. We're seeing in Europe this move to kind of simplification or deregulation. We're seeing in the UK there's regulation that's not happening. I think there's a real question of like really understanding those economic levers, starting to understand the technology as well, and then really grounded thought around what that does to how you are gathering knowledge, what is that doing to your silos, and what that does to our agency to act, I think are really important. And I think the more that people, from a human rights perspective, from a legal perspective, from a social science perspective, understand these technologies, understand the kind of webs of influence that we're sitting within, the more we can advocate from the point of humanity, from the point of human dignity.
Bridget.
Can I build on that? I was very taken by a single sentence that stuck in my mind that was from French President Macron just over a month ago. And the sentence was, "I don't want my democracy to be driven by an algorithm." And it stuck in my mind because one of the things that's really affecting our ability to agitate and to practice human rights is the democratic space is being really challenged. And our democracies and our human rights system are not built for the information flows to be controlled by a very small number of monopolistic corporations. That's not how we're used to information flowing. And it challenges the safety of activists, because all of our communication is happening mediated through power that is controlled, and that challenges surveillance. And I'm not sure any amount of digital security for an activist can really be safe in that circumstances. It's infrastructure designed for very narrow economic interests and not for our liberation. So I think the practice of human rights now needs to take that into account. It's leading to polarization, and it's driving extremism, and it's making the practice of human rights harder.
Anastasia.
Yeah, so how I would see the program, what new areas to include. So I would say it should be fit for purpose for now, for where we are now, and this rise of authoritarian practices that we see across the world, but also very strongly in the region I work on, is a great challenge. And this is not the challenge against only advocacy mechanisms or institutions or norms or, it's getting into the values, and that's where the narrative is attacked. The value-based human rights education, I think, is what is needed now. Focusing on rediscovering that universality that we've also been speaking about since the Second World War. Universal human rights, universal mechanisms. Yes, we can do all together above our borders, fighting for the human. That doesn't really work in many countries. Human rights are demonized. Human rights defenders are attacked. Human rights values are called foreign, imposed on us, not traditional. And if we take away this foundation, this value-based foundation, from underneath the whole norms, mechanisms, institutions, standards, then it all crumbles. So when the foundations are attacked, we need to be fit for purpose. So how do we reshape the foundations of a human rights education? Maybe we can speak about it later in Organise as well. But I think, and I found in my work with teachers and activists in Central Asia, in South Caucasus, in Russia, and in Belarus and Ukraine, that localizing the values is an important development further. And what do we mean under localizing universal values? So just taking and honestly responding to all those attacks and saying, yes, let's look at the freedom, justice, equality that are on the basis of human rights mechanisms, and speak about how foreign they are to you, to your culture, to your traditions, to your language. And the discussions that we are having in human rights trainings with teachers of social studies, variety of subjects, are so inspiring. So when they say, okay, let's take freedom to speak truth to the power. How actually this is very much in the tradition of the Kyrgyz culture, for example, in Kyrgyzstan, where we have a tradition of singers who came out on the public squares and sing poems criticizing those in power who are infringing the rights of the simple people. And these are songs that they sing like in an impromptu style. This has been done for ages. So this is the bit in the human rights, universal human rights, that is local to us, that we recognize it here. I think in these discussions, in these details, is the power of the future of human rights. So that is about agitating, and I have a couple of more suggestions how to improve, but I don't want to steal the floor.
No, I think we can move then to our third word, which is organise, and maybe that will be an opportunity for you to share some more reflections and for our other panelists. But I think a final question to end on before we go to the floor is really important, and something that many people are asking themselves at the moment, is how do you see human rights defenders and activists and affected communities around the world sustaining resilience and safeguarding their well-being in these turbulent times? And as part of that, and I think this is really important to hear your reflections, is what's currently giving you, hope or a feeling of optimism for the future for social movements and for human rights defenders. We were very privileged to host a former fellow of the Institute here a few weeks ago, Albie Sachs, former Constitutional Court judge of South Africa, who spoke to this and said, it is a fact that these values that we hold dear, encapsulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they're deep-rooted, they're too deeply rooted, he said. And I thought that was a note of optimism that we really need to hear. So over to you four. How can human rights defenders look after themselves at the moment? And what are our reasons to be hopeful for the future, including for affected communities around the world? Bridget, go ahead.
I'm going to start with not hope and then go to hope. Because this week I read the news that the planet had reached its first catastrophic climate tipping point, and that is that the coral reefs are facing widespread dieback. That sounds like it doesn't mean so much, but it means that the climate emergency is no longer a forecast, but is setting off a huge chain reaction. But in the face of that, there are things that are moving. The Fiji students who were on a law program and decided to take their law into practice by going to the ICJ and getting a ruling that states must take action on climate. Not enforceable, but still a ruling that makes that statement. And, I'm starting to see, just within these last 5 years, the UN Human Rights Committee recognized the right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. The Inter-American Court on Human Rights was open to the rights of nature, and I think that's where we need to go. I think the right to a sustainable environment, the right of species and biodiversity, and the rights of future generations need to be as important as our individualistic rights. And those aren't new. There's, from a decolonial, localized, universal values, this is including the wisdom and other ways of knowing of land, water, ocean and forest defenders and indigenous communities who have that perception already. And I think that gives me hope that centering the leadership of those people will mean that our rights framework will be more robust against the really difficult situations we're in. And I think that kind of collective rather than individual care, we're very individualized, but I think the indivisibility of rights and the looking after each other in groups and it's not individual self-care, is how people can stay resilient and keep their joy. Hope is a strategy as well. It's a very effective strategy.
Yeah. Shahindha, do you have any reflections on this?
I'll start from hope and then go to Organise. What gives me hope is the younger generation, students, like Bridget said, and just younger people who've been coming out with so much courage and conviction, fearless people, right? And I think those are the people that we need to focus on and nurture. And those are the people who will move agitation and organization forward. And when we look at how they're organizing, how they're uniting beyond borders, we also see state machinery coming at them from all over, from every side. And I think particularly for the student movement, it has been a very hard few years. So many students and staff at universities getting fired, suspended, disciplinary action taken for standing in solidarity with Palestine, for example. I think these institutions should be the care, the institution that provides care for these people. So I think the conversation also needs to go to how can educational institutions be that safe space for students and younger people in general, and actually be able to support the kind of human rights agitation, human rights education that we're imparting to let these people to take it into action. Yeah.
Thanks, Shahindha. Stasia, do you have some thoughts on this?
I don't have much hope. But in those moments of resistance that I see is happening in most risky conditions, like in Georgia, for example, protests against the authoritarian regime and the foreign agents legislation has been on for more than 200 days. People are in the streets now. Despite all the arrests of young people that we had and have much hope for, there are now mothers and sisters of those young activists who are in the streets protesting for those who are arrested. So this resistance is also gives me hope that despite the pressure, there is a wave of resistance. People don't have that paralyzing fear that a lot of post-Soviet countries do have. After a lot of years of repression, they still go out and speak out, no matter what the consequences will be. That gives me hope. As well as the fact that Amnesty still attracts young members and people, and they do join the human rights movement now in big numbers, with the primary sentiment, we want to belong to something bigger than our country. And that is a very hopeful thing for me.
That's interesting. Gaia?
I have the immense privilege of leading an institution, and I think it's a time of a decay in trust in institutions. And so we think a lot about how do we use our position to challenge what others cannot challenge or cannot have the safety to challenge. We think as a north, as a kind of global north-based organisation, we think a lot about our role in maybe channeling other voices that maybe do not have the freedom to speak. I'm thinking a lot about care at the moment. Care is something that is top of my agenda. Like, how do we demonstrate care? It's a really difficult time for people in the UK. I've got members of staff that are very personally affected by a lot of things that we're seeing at the moment. It's a hard time, and how are we a safe harbour for those people? How do we use our position to advocate for what we should be advocating for? How do we show them care? How do we really reinforce, to your point, that a lot of this is communal? So much of the brilliance of human beings is in our communal being. It's not in the individualism that's being pushed on us. So the most hopeful thing I went to recently was a live podcast reporting by the Maybe in New York during Climate Week at UNGA, where there were activists from across the US who are actively working against data centers that are polluting their neighborhoods and are bringing harms to their neighborhoods. And this was such a, to your words actually, a rooted historical discussion, and really pulling the roots and the history out, for me, was very hopeful, and people really pushing forward. And then also, I really gain hope from dialogue. A lot of the work of my institute is driven on speaking to people and having public dialogue, citizens' juries, and what they expect from data and technologies. We are told that human rights aren't in vogue in the UK anymore, and I just don't think that's true. I think when you speak to people, when you unpack the issues, this work is so intuitive for them. They understand it, they feel it. Care, kindness, fairness is so important to the UK public and many other publics. And actually, when talking about digital ID, for example, what we heard from people is they are worried about two-tier societies. They don't want anything that will make the society less just. They care about freedoms. Even during COVID, people were worried about scope creep from technologies because they wanted to know that freedom would be respected. They want to know that anything done will make society more inclusive. So I just think the more we can do to raise our collective voices, that's kind of personally where I just gain a lot of hope.
It's a good note to end on, and perhaps just 3 takeaways for me from this panel to summarise before I thank our panellists and we can all enjoy a glass of wine and some canapes. I think one of the things that's really come through is that human rights still matter, that people want their rights. And if you go to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and interrogate what rights actually are, the right to health, the right to education, the right not to be arbitrarily detained, and so on and so forth, the question then becomes, who is it that's suggesting that rights don't matter and people don't want them, and what's their motivation? Because people do want their human rights. I think secondly, I took away from the conversation the emphasis on solidarity, and perhaps one of the things that the internet and social media has given us is the ability to foment and galvanise, calcify global networks of solidarity now. And I think that's one of the wonderful things that the Master's Program has achieved, a truly global network of human rights defenders who are working in solidarity on these issues, in the struggle in different parts of the world. And thirdly, I would say the thing I took away is that a human rights education really does still matter, but it needs to stay relevant, it needs to continue to evolve, it needs to stay nimble and light on its feet. And the generation that has been working on human rights for decades before need to look for ways to mentor and to pass on that knowledge so that the emerging human rights defenders can take the baton and continue with that work. And that we need to, particularly those of us here in the global north, offering a human rights education, need to continually ask ourselves, and I think one of our panellists mentioned it, how can we continue to support and platform and provide space for those who are already doing the work and who are already in the struggle in different parts of the world? How can we open doors for them to continue the work that they're already doing? So I'd like to thank our panellists. I'd like to thank Bridget, Anastasia, Shahindha, Gaia for coming here tonight and for sharing those reflections with us. I really think you gave us a lot to think about. I appreciate it. Thank you.